Hello, everyone. Welcome to another fun-filled episode of Fangirlz Assemble, brought to you by InStockTrades.com, where you can go for all your collected edition needs. Anything, any publisher, all publisher, you can get it up to 50 to 40% off. I think I have this thing on mute. That was the problem. Sorry about that. But anyway, and you can get shipping 50% shipping on shipping free shipping for 50% $50 and above in US. We're very tired today, guys, so that's why everything is in a mess. However, I'm joined by my co-hosts Kristen and Maddie, and we also have a very special guest joining us today, all the way from San Francisco, I believe, currently. Yep. Frank Gogol. How are you, Frank?
Doing all right. How you guys doing?
We're doing excellent.
Great.
Thank you so much for joining us. Those of you who are just joining us and do not know Frank from our lovely Omnibus collectors group, Frank is the writer of this wonderful anthology series called Grief. So that's why we all read the book, we all loved it, and we just thought that we needed to have Frank on our show and talk about all kinds of things about comic books and stuff. So with that, I think we just have a couple of questions, some questions from the three of us, and then we'll probably take some questions from the audience that have joined us, and let's see how the show goes. Obviously, as always, we always derail the show with some other discussion, so nothing's off topic. Correct, Frank?
No, I'm open.
All right, so with that, I think the first question, we all had in our mind that what was the process of this, writing Grief, because initially you kickstarted this, and then now it's in this handy dandy awesome trade paperback that is coming out this Tuesday in all everywhere comic books can be bought.
Yeah.
Even IST, our fabulous sponsor?
I don't know. I looked, and I'm not sure I saw it, but you can get it from Diamond for sure at your local shop. So the question is, how did the book come about, I guess? Mm-hmm. So the book wasn't supposed to be a book.
Okay.
I have a mentor who used to be an editor at Marvel and who was an editor at IDW and has some connections at IDW. And he, when I started writing, had suggested that I start small with short stories and stuff like that, and build up a portfolio so I can see about getting some freelance work, maybe some backups or something, I don't know, just something somewhere. So I put together 5 or 6 of these stories. Embrace was the first one. I think The Debt was the second one. And I was about 6 months after I started writing, and I laid them out, and I looked and I saw sort of this theme running through all of them about the grieving process and healing and things like that. And I was trying to figure out what to write next, and I decided that I would sort of pursue this more as a thematic book than a portfolio, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I wrote the last 4 stories, so there's 10 total, and I hired Danny Martins to do a cover for it and chapter pages, and I threw that up on Kickstarter, and here I am.
So was it always supposed to be in a comic format, or when you were first writing it, it was supposed to be it was in another format before?
So the first story that I wrote, Embrace, which is the last one in the collection, was a short story I had written for my master's thesis.
Okay.
At one point, I had wanted to do long form prose, and that was what I did my graduate studies in, and I was really bad at it. There's one copy of that graduate thesis in my school library, and I won't tell you where it is because I want anyone to read it. But when I started writing comics,
challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted.
There's a way to find it if you use the internet properly.
Right.
It's bad, so don't do it to yourself. Yeah, so when I went in to start writing comics, I already had the story. I liked the story. I just didn't like how it came out the first time around. So I adapted it for comics, and it was a big sort of jumping in with both feet, trial by fire kind of thing. I had to do a lot of cutting, a lot of restructuring. I was a very bad writer when I wrote that in 2011. I like to think I've come a long way. So that was sort of how this all got rolling. I ended up with that script in April of 2016. By the middle of May of 2016, I had turned that into a complete short comic, hired an artist, a colorist, a letterer, got the whole thing packaged and together. And by December of that year, I had all of Grief written and created.
Nice. So
yeah, it was kind of like, sorry?
No, go for it. Sorry.
I was going to say, I sort of like, I got addicted to making comics in a weird way. Like it was really satisfying getting those first 5 pages back. So I sort of couldn't stop.
Right.
Oh, yeah, and it's kind of like I don't know. Like I'm not a creator, so I kind of don't understand. Like like the process doesn't. I don't understand. Like what I'm just trying to say that I'm not kind of quite sure that how the process kind of begins. So I mean, how does it actually works for you? Like you just the story just comes to you, or the character comes first, or how does it go from the first idea to the completion?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways actually. There's not really one.
Right.
I'd say every story in Grief came from sort of a different place. Like I said, Embrace was an adaptation of a story I'd written. The first story in the collection, Cassandra, was something that I just sort of witnessed one time. I was in San Francisco visiting before I moved here for Christmas 3 years ago, and I just witnessed this really good interaction between a mentally ill homeless woman and 2 cops. And like cops get like a lot of flack in the news, and rightfully so, but like this sort of stuck with me because they were handling it well and respectfully and trying to really help this woman. So that was sort of the nugget that turned into that story that is also about aliens maybe. Yeah, like every story sort of comes from a different place. With The Debt, which is the second story in the collection, I just wanted to write a story that had some kind of magic influence. I'm not very into fantasy and magic, and I wanted to sort of challenge myself. And I know that sounds crazy because I'm a huge Buffy fan, but yeah, other people do it better than me, so I'm going to let them do it. But I did want to try it, so I sort of, that's where that came from. So it's a little bit different. These days, I tend to come up with a really cool concept or an ending I really want to hit, and I either work backwards or forwards from there.
Oh, okay. No, and that's one of the cool things about like there's like 10 anthology story in Grief, and each of them deals with a complete different theme. Like it's just like you as you mentioned, that Cassandra is you don't see the ending coming, and it's kind of like has like with Greek mythology. Then the next one becomes like sort of like you feel like you're back in New Orleans kind of scenario, where there's like magical stuff, sacrifice and all that going on. Then there is another one that's like there's another story that takes place in a rehab, and it's about Christmas Miracle. So each of them is so wildly different. So that's one of the reasons I was kind of thinking that how did all this idea came about?
Yeah, like I said, they come from all over the place. And part of the reason it's so diverse is because, like I said earlier, I was trying to do portfolio pieces. So I wanted to show that I could do a monster story. I wanted to show that I could do a drama story. I wanted to show that I could do a superhero story. I was trying to sort of flex all the different muscles that a writer should have and see what I was good at and what I wasn't good at. And different people have different opinions on which stories are better than others. But I have my top 3 and my least favorite 3.
Oh, tell us. Go for it. Which one would you like? Where do you say no? Let's say where do you say where your strongest point is? Like which direction do you think like in future work is going to you are like you enjoy more writing about?
Honestly, I started writing drama stories first. Like Embrace is a straight drama. There's no monsters, there's no aliens. It's just about a father and his son and a day in their life. And I started writing that way because I figured if I could tell a good character story, I could dress it up any way I wanted. Superheroes, monsters, aliens, Greek mythology, whatever. But if like the heart of the story wasn't there, I was never going to be a good storyteller. So Embrace is easily everyone's favorite story that I meet, or most people's favorite story. It's mine. It's a personal story. It's about my relationship with my cousin who's autistic in a lot of ways. And I just think it's, I don't know, I kind of came out the gate swinging, I guess. Like most people are like, when are you going to write a story as good as that again? And that was the first thing I wrote. So now I'm sitting here like, damn.
Well, I think that definitely, man, that really came across. Like I really loved And it was nice having the twists and the different types of themes and the amalgamations of like either fantasy or sci-fi or nothing or superheroes or, you know, sort of sometimes fake outs. But man, I could really feel the heart and the characters in each thing. Like each story, oh gosh, I just loved it. It's so good.
Thank you.
I could really feel that, and it was really interesting to read that after, because we read we read a lot of different things, but lately it's been a lot of, you know, superhero stuff, and it was really refreshing. I just wanted you to know that.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think the placement of that in the book too kind of like extra punched you in the heart, because after you experience like the monsters and the aliens and the twist, you didn't expect to be like, oh no, now I'm crying. So did you like
that's 100% me growing up on a healthy diet of Buffy. One of my favorite episodes of Buffy, it may be my favorite, is The Body.
Yes.
Yeah, and the reason it's so good is because you can't hit death. Like you can't do anything about it. There's nothing to punch. And like when I write a trauma story, like that's what I go for. I try to make it a little more you know, there is no answer. You just sort of gotta live.
That's great. Yeah. So when you were placing each story, did you have like a back and forth, like, I don't know if I should put this one before this one, or like, how did you do that?
I definitely went back and forth on it for a long time. Back then, it took me a couple days to write a 5-page script and get it to where I wanted. One of the stories in the middle, Prayer, I wrote in one sitting, just sort of as a stress test, but I probably spent 2 weeks on placement. Like I knew what I wanted first and I knew what I wanted last, but sort of figuring out the middle was sort of hard. So I don't know if it comes across in the book. I don't think I've ever asked anybody, but there are 10 stories and there are 5 stages of grief. So there are 2 stories for each stage. And I thought that people would recognize sort of the pattern of what I see. What I really strive to do is make sure that they were in any order. That way nothing was very that was a huge consideration. Also, I didn't want to put any genres that were the same next to each other. So there's 2 superhero stories in there. I made sure they weren't next to each other. I thought about a lot of things. I probably overthought it, but to this day, I do not regret any of the order. So I guess, you know, that's what really matters.
So you brought up like, you know, like what the reader's experience of this was. So what would you say that one takeaway you want readers to take from grief? Because there is a lot of you discuss a lot about healing, about going through struggle, about, you know, surviving. But what's is that the kind of like what you wanted readers to take away from?
Yeah. So the book opens with a sort of open dedication to anyone who's reading it. It says something to the effect of, if you've ever struggled and you're reading this, you know, and you survived or something like that, then I should probably remember that a little better. But the sort of the whole point of it, when I was done putting it together, was, you know, I wanted people to see other people struggling with things that are similar or different, but, you know, just this sense that we all go through stuff. We all struggle with different things. And you'll notice most of the stories end on an upswing. Not everyone, because I wanted it to sort of be realistic, like real life throws curveballs and not everything works out. But for the most part, I want people to walk away with a sense of hope, you know, see other people get through their stuff or be on that trajectory that things are going to get better. That makes sense. Like I've been through a ton of stuff. I talk about some of it in the afterword. But I got through all of it, and I'm a better, stronger person for it. And I think that's what I want to impart onto people. Like, you know, struggle is what makes you stronger.
Right.
So speaking of your afterward, so I really want to talk to you about that because, first of all, I'm very thankful that you put that in there. And I think that's important for a lot of people to share their own story. And I think it provides a good window to view someone's work. And so I'm always very thankful for that. I know that it can be really tough to be really honest at the end of a book like that. And I'm going to share something a little personal. So I have a kind of similar family situation to maybe what you grew up with, where my nephews went through a very, very similar experience and continue to go through that right now, as you did. And so I got to that point in your book, and I'm reading it in my office and bawling, crying, because as an aunt who helped raise my nephews with my mom, I was just like overcome with this motherly emotion of just kind of pride and hopefulness that I got from you. And it's really, I apologize, this is like super cheesy, and it's amazing I'm not crying right now about it, but to see that you took that and grew from it and made something beautiful from it, and I'm just filled with hope, and I'm very thankful that you shared that story in your story, because it kind of, I worry about them a lot, and so to see that with you, it made me very happy. And so just thank you for being very honest about that. I know it's not really a question.
That's all right.
But what made you decide to kind of share that at the end, though? Like, because you didn't have to. You could have just, here's these stories, you know?
Yeah, I think back on why I did it a bunch. Like I tell myself I had these reasons, and I'm not really sure if I'm being honest with myself when I say that I had these reasons. Like, part of it was to get enough pages to make the book, worth printing. Part of it was because I wrote all these stories, and I wanted to sort of justify to myself that they needed to be written, and to say, this is why it's important that we talk about these things, because there is this next chapter that comes after them. Like, I don't know, I think a lot about the news and what we see on the news. I saw a political cartoon a couple of days ago, and I don't want to get too much into it, but it was like 6 white supremacists and Nazis and Klansmen, and all the media outlets were looking at them, and behind them is this mass group of people doing all these really good things. And just this really hopeful thing. And it's just like, that's sort of epitomized for me, just the general way we talk about good and bad things, maybe in America, but just in general, we focus on the bad. We sort of talk about it so endlessly, it's hard to sometimes remember that there can be good, that there's the quote unquote light at the end of everything. So I think that it was sort of a way to segue into that. Like, here are all these stories. This is what comes after. Like, you can imagine for every character, or almost every character, that they can one day write something like that.
And I think like it also brings everything together, because I felt like because I initially read it after you'd done the Kickstarter, and so I was reading the stories. I'm like, okay, they're good, and you're getting all the theme. But I think like the afterwards kind of brings it all together. It all ties it in a nice little bow, and you're like, okay, every story is Frank's story in a way. I felt like every chapter had something to do with your life before your mother's passing, that you said that's the kind of like the chapter of your life. Like, it draws from that. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I really do. And it's not something that was immediately apparent to me until I wrote it. And I can't remember if I wrote it as to be one of the updates for the Kickstarter, because the book was done, but I hadn't finished putting it together when the Kickstarter was running. I finished it while it was running. I think I wrote that to be one of the Kickstarter updates, just to, one of the things they tell you in marketing is you want to connect with your readers, and with backers on Kickstarter, you have to connect with them before that, to try and get them to back. But I wrote that, and I did all the graphic design on Grief. So when I was laying those pages out in InDesign, and I was sort of picking the panels to lay out with the paragraphs and stuff, I sort of, there's the picture, there's an image of the kid sitting at the back of the AA meeting, and then there's the guy at his dad's funeral, and then the mom in the hospital bed. Like, I found all these sort of embedded images that I didn't plan, but were sort of snapshots of moments in my life, and it may come off slightly as a little bit of emotional manipulation to put them all throughout. And, I think it raises, you can go back and read the stories and look for a little bit more of me in them each time.
Right. Now, I think like, it's I thought that it was perfect to have that in there. So, I mean, that's why, like, I'm absolutely grateful, as Maddie said, like, not only it gives people hope, like, who are going through similar situation, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but at the same time, you get to see where the writers are, like, where the creators are coming from. So, to me, that's kind of more interesting. So how do you think, like, all these these experiences, some of them are really difficult, actually most all of it is kind of difficult, kind of shaped you as a creator?
Well, like I said, I grew up on a healthy diet of Buffy, and I grew up on a healthy diet of Stan Lee Silver Age Spider-Man stories. So, like, part of my writing sort of, I guess, motto or the way I approach is I really want to put my characters through the ringer, like really, really torture them, for lack of a better word. So I wanted to really test the bounds of what my characters were going through, and that's still like the number one criteria for when I start writing a new book. I don't know if I'm answering the question anymore, but yeah, so I want to see how far I can push my characters before they break, and then have them not break anyway. And I think that's sort of the formula for hope.
And I always think that characters like that are more relatable and compelling too. I think it's always really nice to see people really, really go through things and see how they react and how they go through things. And it's always nice to see a difference as far as if the characters deal with it differently and how they recover differently. It's always, I don't know, it makes them more, all my favorite characters are all screw ups, and they get better and they screw up again and they get better. And those are the best kinds.
Yeah. I can't remember where I read it or who said it, but one of my biggest writing tenets is put your characters in situations where they want to give up and where they want to just break down and cry, and don't let them. Find a way to make it so that they don't.
Now I'm gonna use that in my life. Put myself in a situation that I
maybe don't put yourself in a situation. You don't have to go out and do that to yourself. Okay.
Just walk about, and I'm like, well, because Frank said so. I need to become a compelling character.
Don't do it. But if you do, let me know and I'll write that story.
Oh, yeah. See? That's why. Yeah, that's why. Now I need to. Now I must.
Well, my friend Casey, who is a writing partner of mine and a colleague of mine, and she's with my publisher, and she's a much better writer than me, is watching this, I believe. And she likes to stick her friends in her books and sort of immortalize them. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately. So, you just keep being nice to me and you could end up in one of these books.
Ooh, guys, you heard it here first.
But what kind of awful bit like heart-wrenching situation will we be in?
I don't know yet, but I guarantee you it will be.
Hey, listen, if you can put me together somewhere about, let's see, what heart-wrenching situation I can be. Like, it's like I'm stalking Chris Evans, and then I end up in a jail, but then I go and say, worth it.
That's just your real life. What are you?
That's just like what's happening yesterday.
Like, it was worth it. Anyway, all right. So how long it took? 23 minutes. We keep count. It's like how long it takes me to introduce Chris Evans into the podcast. So today it was 23 minutes. Everyone take a shot. This is the thing. All right, Kristen, you want to go next one?
You mentioned growing up on a healthy diet of Stan Lee comics. So I assume you were always into comics. And what were you reading like growing up?
All right. So I know I don't look it, but I am 30 years old. So I was born in 1987. I didn't read my first comic until 1997. It's actually on a shelf right behind me. You can't see it, but it was a terrible comic. It was from the Marvel DC Amalgamam comics. It's a terrible word. I can't say that either. But it was a mashup between Superboy and Spider-Man. And I actually had to track the issue down because I didn't have it anymore. But I found it based on one really bad panel. The last page is him just sitting on like a sign eating Chinese food. So I looked for that for years and years and years. I didn't pick up another comic regularly until I was a senior in high school, so 2006. But I have read avidly ever since, every day ever since. The first comic I bought in my sort of adult life was the issue of Amazing Spider-Man where they introduced the Iron Spider suit. I think it's 526. I read about it in my newspaper, and I was like, all right, that seems cool. And then I read all of Civil War, and I kept running with it. So sort of I had two introductions to comics, one false start in 97, and then 9 years later, I jumped in with both feet.
Nice. Do you have a top 5 favorite? I know it's hard.
I had this conversation with somebody recently, and it seemed like it shouldn't have been the case. I think it shifts on me a lot, and that's part of the problem. There are a couple of books I return to a lot. One of them is David Mack's Kabuki. It's not an amazing book, but it's a good book. And I really like some of the stuff he does with the art. There's some really cool transitions where things like fade into one another. There's one page with 8 panels, and everything sort of transitions from panel to panel. It's all different shapes and things that were symbolic throughout the book. So I've never been able to do anything like that with my writing. So I just keep coming back to that. And it's a good story. It's a good revenge story, tech noir, about a daughter avenging her mother. I like that a lot. The Crow is a big one for me. That's another one that I don't think is a very good comic, but I think it's a very powerful comic. It's a straight revenge violence story, but it's got this great heart to it, which is something I obviously strive for in my writing. A lesser known book that I go to a lot is Demo by Brian Wood and Becky Cloonan. It's a collection of 12 one-shots, and they're all sort of, I call them backseat superpower stories. So every story is about a superpowered character, but the plot is really just sort of like a mundane, like one is about a guy who works in the steel mill who him and his friends want to rob they want to rob the earnings from the steel mill, and he turns on them, and it has nothing to do with him having superpowers other than it being part of the plot. And that was a pretty big influence on Grief, just because, like I said, character first. So anything with superpowers or magic in Grief it's sort of an afterthought compared to the actual plot of the story and what I wanted to get across. Beyond that, let me see what's on the shelf over here. I don't know. I really like Don McGregor's Black Panther run. That was sort of the first serialized multi-part comic story ever told. And I think he did a pretty good job. It doesn't age as well as some of the other comics. It's a little tropey these days, but it's still a well-structured, fun story. I love Black Panther. I think you guys are going to ask me my characters later, so I'll tell you that one now. Trying to think. Those are probably the big ones. I'm sure there are others. Grief by Frank Gogol is pretty great.
Yeah, I've heard it's pretty good.
Yeah, we heard that too. Do you know that guy? We may want to have him on the show. So you mentioned a couple of times. Yeah, you mentioned a couple of times that it's a good story. So in your eyes, what makes a story a good, compelling story? Everyone has a different definition of it. So what's yours?
Sure. All right, so there's two things, and one of them is not scientific at all. But the first one is there's a difference between story and plot, and this is something Robert McKee talks about in his screenwriting book called Story, which is right next to me. I go back to that often to refresh my writing. But plot is what happens, and story is how the character changed because of what's happening. So we sort of use story interchangeably for both of those things, but that's sort of how I look at it. So I think a good character arc is what makes a good story. And a character arc can be something simple. It's just a simple change, a point of view change, whether a character is in love with somebody, and then by the end of the story, they're no longer in love with that person, or vice versa. So I think that's sort of the basis for what a good story is. And then the other part of it is how it's told. If it's told interestingly, I think I see it behind you on the shelf. Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four is one of his best works. Yep. I love Hickman's work, but the Fantastic Four stuff stands out with me because he doesn't do that much character work. He does a lot of really cool ideas and plot, and that's his style, and it's great. But the FF stuff is really character driven, and you can see, Johnny's arc in the backup story in issue 600, where you find out what happened to him after he died.
Spoiler for Fantastic Four
from 7 years ago.
Go for it. Sorry.
But no, you see Johnny make this transition from being this doofy kid to being some kind of a leader. I won't say any more than that, but he grows up a little bit. So that's the kind of thing that makes a good story, and it's told really interesting. Like the format of that story is, you see it sort of day by day and more rapidly by each page.
Right, and I would like to absolve Frank of his guilt, because look at it. This is in the back of this. It says that tragedy strikes, and look at this. Look at the tragedy. There's like 3 characters at the back. So the publisher didn't care. Neither should you.
So that is what makes a good story to me. The other thing, I mentioned that I have a master's degree in prose and creative writing. I have a second master's degree in poetry, which I don't talk about very much. Not because I'm embarrassed, it doesn't come up. But one of the things I learned when I was in grad school learning poetry is there's this concept. It's called duende, D-U-E-N-D-A, or E maybe. But it's a Spanish word. It translates to something like trolls under a bridge. It means absolutely nothing. But in poetry, it means like when you read something or you see something and you just inherently know it's good. And like you can't necessarily put it into words. Like most people watch The Godfather and they're like, that was a good movie. If you ask them why, they might have a hard time telling you why, but they know it is. Like it's sort of. I just picked the movie. Chinatown, The Departed. I like crime movies apparently, but like you watch it and sort of culturally, it's everyone knows it's good and not everybody knows why. You just do. Right. So that's a factor for me. Like when I read Kabuki, like I read it, I knew it wasn't a great book, but I knew there was something about it that I really loved. And I still, like 10 years later, can't put it into words. So there's a non-scientific aspect to it all.
Well, I definitely think there's some things that, I find this a lot when I read things where I can say that maybe it's not something that would be classically really good, or a lot of people would say it was really good, but for me, it's very good. It was very powerful. Where I can watch other things, I'm like, that was a very good movie. This was very, I think that everyone would see this and it would rate well, or it would be Oscar worthy or whatever. But maybe it doesn't draw me like this other thing does.
Exactly.
So maybe that's something similar.
Yeah, there are lots of books that people really enjoy that I don't like, but understand why they like them. Like, this is going to sound like heresy, but Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, like I read it. It wasn't it's not a book that was made
this
for me.
broadcast is over.
It's an excellent book. Like I love the structure and the character work and everything. I think it's brilliant. It's just not a book that's made for a straight white 30-year-old. You know what I mean? That's not to say that a guy who is my profile can't enjoy it or won't enjoy it, but it's I know that book wasn't made for me, and that's fine. Like my girlfriend loved it.
From now on, we're gonna screen people about when we interview them.
You have to ask about Ms. Marvel.
I mean, now I don't know how to deal with. Go on with my life.
I was gonna mess this up somehow.
I think we all froze when that started.
Well, because we were scared of Faria. Like, oh no, here it comes.
Did I say Miss Marvel? I meant Thor.
Yes, exactly. Good recovery, Frank. Good recovery. But no, I think that makes sense though, because you were saying that it's not actually a common, like a lot of people said that, I don't deal with, like I don't connect with Ms. Marvel, but I understand it's a good story and stuff. To me, Spider-Man is like that, because I understand that, but however, Spider-Man and Kamala Khan are actually same character for 2 different demographic. It's the same exact. They're the same character.
Exactly. No, it's 100% true. I thought about this a lot when I watched Spider-Man: Homecoming. Spider-Man was like my first real favorite hero. He's not in the top 5 anymore now that I'm a little bit older and I've read more. But I was watching the Andrew Garfield, the Tom Holland version, and this is a story about a young man growing up in a technological world. And I don't think the Tobey Maguire ones are that good, but I relate more to Tobey Maguire because he's a guy living in the early 2000s and going through the things that I went through when I was that age. And so it's the same character, but for 2 different audiences. So I 100% get what you're saying.
Right. And speaking of, that kind of gives a segue to another question. I wanted to ask, there was always this, comic book fans in general do not like changes, but I think like in order for comic industry to survive, they need to continue to upgrade their characters, which means now more and more diverse, audiences, demographic are being introduced to comic because of the movies. You can call it the movies, all the different medias are being available in digital. So what's your opinion on all introductions of diverse characters in comics, or like, or having more options, like having Kamala Khan alongside Peter Parker?
Sure. I mean, there's like the right answer that, diversity should be accepted and we should have more of it. And that's 100% the right answer. I think it's a little bit more of a complicated conversation than we let it be sort of on the internet. Like you're either right or wrong on the internet. Mm-hmm. I think for me, what it comes down to is good story. I think Kamala is a new character. They're telling an excellent story with her, and that's why it's sticking and that's why it's resonating. Sam Wilson as Captain America was another excellent story, but it was a black man taking on a white man's mantle, and they both worked because they told good stories. I think it's probably widely agreed that Marvel sort of didn't handle it the best and maybe did a little bit too much at once and did some diversity for diversity's sake, and it showed in sales and it showed in the quality of the books. And I think that's probably the wrong way to do it. But when I write, I don't think about who I'm writing about. I have some rules when I write. I don't tell stories that aren't mine to tell. So there's a couple exceptions to that in Grief, but each one was a situation where I partnered with somebody whose story it was to tell, and I felt like that gave me a little bit more breathing room to tell that story. So one example of that is the story Different in the Middle. It's about a trans girl. Mm-hmm. I wrote that story and I read it over and I sat for a couple of days and I waited and I read it again and I said, this is not my story to tell. But I really liked the story. I really wanted the world to see it. So I reached out to a trans comic creator, Kylie Wu, who's credited in the front of the book as a special thanks. Mm-hmm. And I asked her to read it over, let me know what she thought, give me some feedback, and just, sort of a sensitivity test and to give it a little more authenticity. And she came back to me a few days later with some notes, and she said, this is a good story. I think you should share it, but here are the things that I would do differently if you want this to resonate and to come off as authentic. And I think that's one of the ways that this can be done. I've mentioned already that I'm a straight white guy, and in a world full of diversity and comics, that was a terrible way to say that. In a world where diversity is becoming more regular in comics, as it should be, it's if we go by the rule that I can't tell a story about a woman, about a Muslim man, about a black woman, about a gay teen, like I'm going to be locked into this box where I can write, Danny Rand and Clint Barton, which I'd be okay with. Both of those are very, very dear to me. But I would like to tell stories about the world I live in and like what it actually looks like. I have friends who are all different creeds and races and orientations. These are people who are dear to me, and I want to tell stories about people like them and have that be part of what's happening to make that more normalized. But I think that the right way to do it is to ask yourself, is this my story to tell? And if it's not, and you really feel compelled to tell the story, to find somebody whose it is and do it, at least let them help you, if not work with you on it. So like the difference would be like, I'm writing a female-led book right now called The Used. It's sort of my ode to Buffy, actually. Mm-hmm. So is everything I write. But it's not a story. It's a story about a woman, but it's not about a woman's experience per se. It's a little bit different. Like if I was writing about, I don't know, a person learning, coming to terms with the fact that they like that's not something I would touch. Like, that's not my story to tell. But Kayla, my main character in The Used, is she happens to be a girl, but you could swap her out for anybody else and still tell the same story. So I feel more comfortable telling that story, if that makes sense.
Right. And I got a sneak peek of the first issue of The Used, and I can say it's really good. Wink, wink. That's all I can say without giving much away. But the thing is like, that actually, you bring up a good point that, you know, it's my story to tell. And I think that's something that we get into a lot of argument and back and forth about that, oh, you know, this character should be this way, or this person writing this, blah, blah, blah. But don't you think like it kind of creates this discussion that means women should always be writing women's story, men should always be writing men's story? Because in that case, like, what's the, if let's say that Becky Cloonan now wants to write Batman story, don't you think that people can come up with the argument that, oh, she's not a billionaire orphan man, you know?
Well, like, I am not a fan of putting people in boxes. Like, I don't want to be put in a box. I don't want anyone else to put me in a box. But if it was down to me and a woman to be the writer for Ms. Marvel next, I would 100% defer to the woman because she's going to do it better than me. And that's, yeah, I don't have that experience, and I never will. I would be very blessed to be able to write a story about Kamala. Hopefully one day I can, and I get a kick-ass female artist and colorist on that, and a female letterer and a female editor, and you know, we make it as authentic as possible. Or it could be a whole group of dudes who tell a really powerful story about Kamala it isn't so much about being a woman as it is maybe being a superhero. But I think, so I keep thinking back to when Iron Fist was announced for Netflix, and a lot of people got up in arms that
Right.
And I understand the arguments. I mentioned I'm a Danny Rand fan. I'm perfectly fine with him being a white guy. If he wasn't, my concern would be, are they going to tell a good story? Like, I'm going to keep coming back to that statement. If they just made Danny Chinese just to make him Chinese, and they didn't make it meaningful that he was Chinese, and I wouldn't have a problem with that change, but I would always feel like they could have done better.
Right.
Yeah, diversity for diversity's sake is only 50% of where we need to be. We need to be somewhere. We need diversity for diversity.
So what to you that kind of makes it like a little bit force fed? Like what are the, because I can tell. So among the group of us, I think I can say that I'm a bit too diverse, probably, but you know, but the thing is that I can always tell it's forced. Like, you know, I feel that it's forced. I'm like, okay, I didn't need it, all of that. But what kind of, like, you know, what, like, do you feel that at times that it's just like, okay, this is just a bit too forced?
Sure. I mean, I'm coming at it from a different perspective from you, and I like to think I'm a mature person and I understand the need for all of this. But like when somebody was like, oh, Danny Rand should be Chinese or he should be Asian, there was a small part of me that was like, no, but Danny's white. He's like me. And like, you know, there are a lot of people on the internet who feel this much more strongly than me. And this is like a little twang on my heartstrings. Like, oh, but like at the end of the day, like I get it. But I still, like, from that same filter and that same lens, I can feel when it's forced too. Like, I don't know if you guys remember spoilers for the second issue, I think, of Mighty Thor, the second Jason Aaron series with Jane as Thor. She's fighting Titana, I think, in like the opening sequence, and there's just all this back and forth banter about girl power. And I think what Aaron was trying to do was really like drive it home, like to come off overly strong about it. And you know, with these two powerful women, like I think it was a pretty strong metaphor. But in the wrong hands, that same scene would come off as forced.
I agree.
Yeah.
Oh, I haven't read that yet.
Supergirl season 1, which I love now. I love that show. But there's a lot of just like, hey, did you know that I'm a girl? And like, obviously, you know, but it's all right.
Yeah, your face told us that.
I'd even say that's still there a little bit, but yeah, no, that first season Supergirl is a pretty good example. But you know what? Like, part of that coming on strong and being over the top about it is part of normalization. Like, you throw enough things in people's face, they get desensitized to it. The sort of offsetting factor is you create resentment too, which hurts in the long run. But I think, you know, the more you hear something, the more you're exposed to it, and the stronger it is when you are, like, the more it becomes part of culture.
Yeah, I do
So
believe
like,
that though. Like I do believe that
yeah,
like there is now an overabundance of, women of color in leading roles or in like role of power in TV series
mhm,
and all these things. And to me, I'm like, okay, that's great, but it also feels a little bit okay,
targeted.
but
Yeah,
yeah, but the thing is like it feels a little forced, or oftentimes it's like, okay, I didn't think about it this way. But because I keep on look for it and I see that and I see the
yeah,
pattern of it, and to me,
mhm,
I think at one side it feels like, okay, is it just doing it for the sake of diversity? But the other side of me just say that no, we need to have this done so that people get okay about it. Like now, it's not a big deal to see mixed race couple on TV as much as
mhm.
like people getting about like gay couples,
Lucy
like
did.
clutch my
Yeah.
pearl. So I think like it
Mhm.
will get there eventually, but as you said. So is there another question you guys ladies wanted to ask? Then sorry.
Yeah, so you predicted correctly that we would probably ask you about your favorite characters. And now
Mhm.
I assume Iron Fist is one of those. But
What gave you that
for
idea?
your other favorite characters, we can kind of share why.
Sure. Top of the totem pole, I guess. It's always going to be Hawkeye. I love the idea
Good.
of just this average Joe who had to work for his powers and has to. There's a great when Cullen Bunn took over Captain America from Ed Brubaker, it turned into like a Captain America and Friends kind of series of one shots, and Cullen Bunn did a Hawkeye one, and it's Cap and Hawkeye on like just some adventure, and they're sort of going back and forth about what it means to be a hero. And Hawkeye points out to him, like, I have to train at this every day. You just wake up the way you are.
Hmm.
And like that, being a writer and being somebody who's into fitness, you probably can't tell, but I do work out. It's something you have to keep at every day. And like I wake up at 5 o'clock every morning to write, and I go to bed at 11 o'clock. I get a solid 6, and somewhere in between I work out, and then I go to work for 8 hours, and then I come home and I do comics, emails, and business. Like it is a constant grind, and you need to always be getting better. Like I've been only doing this for almost 2.5 years, and like I feel like I've had like a really good head to try this. But the amount of work is proportionate to the amount of success. So if I want to be better than I am, I need to be doing more work all the time. And that about Hawkeye really sort of sits well with me and speaks to me. That, and I love his old school costumes, just so goofy and purple.
Hmm.
Yeah. So after him, I'd say Iron Fist, obviously. I think he's, especially after the Ed Brubaker, Matt Fraction stuff, like there's just such cool mythology there. Um, I wouldn't say I ever consider myself an orphan, but if you've read Grief, you know that both my parents have passed away, so I sort of identify a little bit with Danny in that. After that, I love Black Panther. I mentioned the Don McGregor run earlier. That's in my top 5. I love um, just sort of the idea of this. Yeah, well, you guys all know this crazy advanced um, secret black society that is just in the way and just I don't know. It's such a wonderful little mythology. After that, I don't know who would come after that. Those are definitely my top 3.
Okay. So would you say you like Marvel more than DC? To mentioning DC characters, so I
Um,
see a
yeah,
trend.
I didn't really get into DC until New 52. I know a lot of people crap on DC and the New 52 in particular as
Hmm.
like, oh, everyone is like, I jumped off, but that's when I jumped on. So, it worked out a little bit at least. They got at least one new read out of it.
Hmm.
And I enjoyed Snyder's Batman. I really, really liked Jeff Lemire's Green Arrow. I haven't really liked any other Green Arrow other than that, but that story was awesome.
Okay.
And again, cool mythology building story. So maybe that's like the common trend here. So I'm late to DC. I've only been reading DC for 5 or 6 years. I really, really like Dan Jurgens' action run that just ended.
Hmm.
The Bendis stuff still has yet to impress me, but it's not bad, like I thought it would be. Uh, anything Jeff Johns has ever touched, I think, is gold. I'm reading his JSA right now for the first time. I'm really enjoying that. So I don't know that I have a favorite. I could tell you who my favorite at DC is, but they'd still be like number 20.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh wow, number 20.
I really recommend if you like Hawkeye. I'm seeing so based on what I know, and maybe this is just me projecting what I feel about what I like about your work and the characters I like. I really feel like if you haven't read anything with Roy Harper in it, who's Green Arrow's sidekick,
Arsenal,
turned, yeah, Arsenal. I really feel like maybe you should check him out if you haven't. And maybe that's just my bias because I love him and he's my favorite, but I really think you'd like it.
I'm reading or I was reading Titans until I still am, but he's no longer in Titans, I don't think. But,
oh God.
But I really liked the last arc was sort of him going solo, and I like that. It kind of made me wish they'd do like a mini of just him doing his thing. Yeah. And I love his backwards hat. It's such a stupid superhero costume, but
I know, I love it. He's so great.
He's punk too.
Maddie would push Roy Harper to anyone. Like she tried to do that to Harriet Glickman, which was kind of weird.
I don't think I brought that up. Did I? I didn't bring up Roy Harper. I would have never brought that up to Harriet. Oh my God. No.
Yeah,
because I just feel like to me, he's the example of a really great character story that doesn't get used a lot because he really hit rock bottom, and he really built that up, and he's wonderful. And I can't wait to see what the next big crisis is going to do with him while dealing with mental issues because he's perfect. Okay, sorry. This isn't the Roy Harper show. I'll stop. So anyways.
Roy Harper show with Madeline Miles.
Listen, if you want to do another show where we just talk about Roy, I'm happy to do that.
Oh, look at that.
Can we please have a Roy Harper show? I can give you a whole thesis on why characters like this need to exist and why they're great. Just regular old Joes with addiction issues.
I would be right there with you on that, for sure. I don't know, characters who are flawed are more interesting. That's why Fraction's Hawkeye was so much more interesting than any of Hawkeye before. Fraction's Hawkeye was an idiot. He's just this big-hearted guy who can't do anything right. Every issue started with the words, "I know this looks bad," and it was.
You're back on my good grace again because you got off after saying that whatever you said about Miss Marvel. I stopped listening.
No, it was
but
Thor.
Then you got back on. Right, it was Thor. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Let's go back on.
It wasn't even Thor. It was Scorpion from Spider-Man.
Right. But then you got back on by saying that Fraction Hawkeye was great. Hawkeye. Is it Hawkeye or Hawkeye was great?
I have a shirt that says Hawkeye with a G, so I think it's with a G.
Right. I read, I think that was one of the earlier Marvel things that I've read, and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Who is this guy? Why is he such an idiot? Someone stop him. So, I love it.
It's a great book. I have a really great story about that, actually. So that came out in August 2012, if I'm going back far enough correctly. And I'm a huge Hawkeye fan, and I'm an idiot, and I didn't pre-order it at my shop. And I went in, and they're like, "We're sold out." And I went to every shop in my area, and it was sold out everywhere. The last shop in my area, which I didn't avoid because I didn't like it. I avoided it because they have a reality TV show set there. It was Jay and Silent Bob's Secret Stash, where they film comic book movies. Yeah. So I'm originally from New Jersey. That shop is in Red Bank. I went to high school in Red Bank, New Jersey. But I went in, or I drove up, and there's this guy sitting outside. All the windows are blacked out. There's this big bouncer guy outside with a clipboard. And I walk up and I'm like, "Hey, can I buy a comic book?" And he was like, "You can, but you got to fill out all these non-disclosure agreements."
Oh my God.
19 pages
of
my signature. So I signed them because I really wanted to get this book, and I knew they had a copy. I'd called ahead, and I went in and I picked up the last copy off the shelf. Behind me, they were filming. Trying to remember what episode it was for anyone who has watched it. They were praising something like a Batman and Robin metal sign or something. And I don't know, I don't want to ruin the magic for everyone, but reality TV is really fake, super fake.
No. What?
Yeah, crazy, I know. Oh my God, you didn't know.
No, I didn't know.
Yeah. So no, but so what they do in reality TV, and I've had some friends who are producers in reality TV confirm this for me, is they will script a scene several different ways to try and elicit different emotional reactions or try different camera angles. They'll sort of cut and paste the things that work best together, and that's how you get a reality TV episode. So they wouldn't let me leave because I was in the background of a shot. And they said if I wasn't in a shot, and then they cut to another shot where I was, and then back to one where I wasn't, and like the continuity would be all off.
Right.
So I'm standing in the background of this. They kept me there for like an hour and a half, and they made me turn my shirt inside out because it had a logo on the front. Like it was just this whole nonsense thing. But I got Hawkeye 1 out of it, and so that was that.
Do you still have that issue? That's the question.
I don't. So 2 months later, Hurricane Sandy hit, and it wrecked my apartment, and I lost all my comics. But there was like a silver lining that came out of that. I don't know. In like a moment of weakness, I went on Twitter because I hate Twitter, and I tweeted out a picture of like all my comic boxes just splayed across the floor and wet, and like with running signatures on some of the issues. And Rick Remender ended up seeing it, and he reached out to me and asked me for my address, and like a month later I got a package of Rick Remender comics in the mail from me. Nice. Yeah, he's a really good guy.
Oh, well, I'm really glad that all worked out. That's nice.
Yeah. Still, and I did end up getting the entire run of Hawkeye settled and back in order, so that's good. And I was able to thank Matt Fraction in person for writing issue 8, which dealt with the hurricane.
Right.
So that was a plus. So it all ended up happy.
Right. Yeah, and I did meet Rick once, and he is a very cool guy. Like, he's like, he would take time to, even though there was like 200 people waiting in line, he would take everyone, like, at least give everyone like 5 to 10 minutes. Like, as a matter of fact, like the shop, like, one of the person from the shop is like, hey, Rick, if you want to talk to people, you have to keep on signing as well.
Wow.
Yeah, no, he's a really good guy and a great creator. He's definitely my favorite creator, not because he sent me comics, but because he's so talented.
It's okay. You can tell us because he sent you comics. We won't tell.
He's the only one who did it, so he's both the best and worst person who's ever done it to me.
Well, so all this, like, you're talking about, I think your favorite, we have now gleaned, is Marvel. That's where your heart lies. Yeah. But if you were called to kind of write for Big Two, which character would you pick and why?
Ooh. So contrary to what most people might do, I would stay away from characters I like so I don't screw them up. As maybe I'm a good storyteller, maybe I'm a bad storyteller, but I don't want to find out on a Hawkeye book that I'm a bad storyteller. I have a pitch for for an Avengers book that I'd like to write someday. And it's just, I don't have like an actual story. I just have a lineup that I would really like to write. And it's basically like the Marvel ripoff of the Justice League, but not who are those ripoffs of the Justice League with Hyperion and
Hyperion, Nighthawk. Hang on. Okay, you're back. You are like doing a roller coaster today. You're off the list, then you're back on the list. Now you're off the list again.
I love those characters. I just can't remember the name of their team.
Yeah.
Supreme or Supreme Power.
All right. So the concept behind them was Marvel wanted to rip off the Justice League. So it was Hyperion, Superman, Nighthawks, Batman, etc., etc., etc. There are enough other characters that are similar to the Justice League that I think would make a much better team. So follow me on this. All right. So you got, instead of Superman, you have Sentry, who's friggin' nuts. All right. Instead of Batman, you have Moon Knight, who's even more nuts. Instead of Aquaman, you've got Namor, who's a big old a-hole.
Yes, for Namor.
Yeah. So I built out this roster of like these really, really like awful and like arrogant characters, and I want to put them together as an Avengers team. And just, I feel like in 6 issues they will kill each other, and I feel like finding a story where they learn to work together would be magic.
I would
love that.
Yeah, I would buy them. Like, I don't buy issues, but I would buy the issues of that because that is so wild.
Yeah. So other than that, I don't know who else I'd want to write. I would love to write Kate Bishop. I know we've had this conversation about whether I should write certain stories or not, and I think I could tell a pretty good Hawkeye Kate Bishop story without having to duck down too much about it. I love Kate more than I love Clint, but don't tell Clint that.
We will not. We will not. But okay, so yeah, now I want to write. Can you please write that story anyway? Like the one that you're talking about.
Write a fanfic for us.
Yeah, like just for us, like it's gonna be a Fangirlz Assemble. Yeah, I mean, we love fan fictions around here, so just write it anyway. And you don't have to even use the name, but we will kind of know what you're talking about. So in that way, Disney can't sue you. But
yeah, well, so I have a funny story about that. My girlfriend is a huge Captain Marvel Carol Danvers fan. I started writing comics. She said, "Will you write me a Carol Danvers story?" And I said, "Hell no, I don't want to get sent to jail by Disney." So you guys read Grief. There's a character in a story who's pretty similar to Carol Danvers, down to the red scarf. So I'm not above ripping off Marvel and hiding it. I can do that. I mean, she's even in the military. Like it's literally the same character in a different costume, same haircut, everything.
Well, different. Thank you for admitting to it, because that was the whole podcast was about. Live stream was about to get you to admit. Get that out. You've been served, sir.
You guys got me.
All right, but would you consider writing a Carol Danvers story then, if the opportunity comes, or write something similar but with not Marvel?
Yeah, I would absolutely. If anyone would let me write any of their characters, I would absolutely. I would dive at the opportunity. There are tons and tons of amazing characters. I'm a huge Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fan. That's one that I'm really pushing to get a couple pages on at least before I die. And I don't want to say I'm close, but I am not very far away from it. I don't know how much I can say about that. I wouldn't don't read too much of that, but I do know the editor, and I have talked to him, and one of my writing mentors has written a lot of Ninja Turtles. So it's, in terms of being close to it, I'm closer than some other people. I'll say that. Okay. But that doesn't mean anything. But yeah, if somebody said, "Hey, do you want to write a Carol Danvers story?" I would say absolutely. People always tell me that British actors are better actors than American actors because they won't turn down a role because they're not above anything. And that's sort of how I feel about writing. Like, unless something was offensive for some reason, I wouldn't say no to it. Not at this point in my career.
Right.
And I use the word career very loosely.
No, it has a very bright future. I can tell that. So, yes. Speaking of kind of getting your feet or having a career in comic out of, I feel like it's always a very tough business to get into. So, what advice would you give to up and coming creators or creators who are dreamers like yourself?
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess the first general advice is to finish something. I think the analogy I've sort of come to is you can move into the top 1% of comic writers if you finish even a short story, because most people set out to do this only ever talk about it, and then the ones who do actually try to write never finish anything. So if you can finish even a 5-page story, you are 99% of the way there. And the next goal is to just get into the 1% of the 1%, and that's your Rick Remenders and your Jonathan Hickmans and your Brian Bendis's. But if you even finish a 1-page comic top to bottom and have a finished thing to show somebody, you're so much further along than anyone else. So finish. And if you want to move really fast, connect with people in a genuine way. Like, a lot of people approach networking in a really garbage way where they just, they meet people and they try to get people in their network who can help them. Instead of just trying to become friends with them. Like, all the people I've networked with, I consider friends, and I talk to them on a regular basis, even if it's just a little bit. And never once have I said, I need to know this person because they can help me. And I think that is one of the filters in the comic community. Like, the comics creator community is very small. It's a couple hundred people. doing it at the pro level, maybe 1,000 people altogether. I don't know if those numbers are true, but it's small. And if you get known for being like a ladder climber or a jerk off or anything like that, like it gets around pretty quickly. Like you can get a reputation filtered out real quick.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I feel like
they cut out.
Yeah, I feel like the mic cut
I
out.
thought I saw somebody talking. I was like, wait a second.
How long was I talking? No one can hear me.
No,
We can hear you.
We could hear you, but I couldn't hear anyone else. Yeah, so the thing is, like, and that kind of brings up another good question. Like, we see that you go to a lot of cons and stuff like that. So what's considered to be an acceptable con behavior? And, because there are stories that even the editors of Marvel have said that, oh, I was trying to see someone's portfolio and they just pushed me away and saying that this is not for sale or something like that. So what kind of thing, like, you typically do when you go to a con?
Yeah. I mean, I think at the very highest level, just the golden rule applies. Treat others as you want to be treated. Just be kind and courteous. I think you can get more granular about advice depending on what role you have at a con. Like if you're a fan and you're visiting with a creator, be conscious that the creator is there for a reason, and that reason is to sell their books and to meet people and make fans. And like don't stand at their table for an hour and talk to them and like make it hard for them to interact with other people. When you're behind the booth, we call those people booth barnacles. And when you're on the other side, like the same thing applies. Like be nice to everyone. Like there are some people, I don't know, people get into comics for different reasons, and some people get into comics as like a way to escape and to find something. And I know there's no judgment, and those people will come up to the booth once in a while and they'll talk to you for a really long time, and be understanding with them and be kind to them and like make their experience good. Like it all comes back to just being really nice to one another. And like cosplayers, people harass cosplayers. Like don't do that. Don't be an ass. Like it's that simple. Sorry, I almost cursed.
No, it's okay.
You're fine. You can do that.
Yeah, you can totally do that over
cool.
here.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, Maddie is like a known cosplayer, and she told us some stories.
I have a lot of con stories.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
I've
witnessed it like secondhand, just watching people deal with this. I can't even imagine what it's like to have it happen first person.
Right.
Do you think you would ever do it? Do you think you'd ever cosplay any of your favorite comic book characters?
I can see him being a good Hawkeye.
Yeah.
I had this conversation with somebody recently, and it was a conversation more so about why people do cosplay. And I'm not saying this is the only reason, because if I said that, it would sound horrible. But one of the reasons, a small reason people cosplay, is because they want to be looked at. They want to feel noticed. I have a friend, very good Pam from Archer cosplayer. She's like spot on, and being seen and being recognized for her talent for that gives her confidence. But I'm more interested in blending into the crowd. Like I don't want to stand out. I want my work to stand out. So I don't know that I ever would cosplay. If I did, it would probably be like as something where you wouldn't know as me, like a giant Grimace costume or something, like from McDonald's. I don't know. Yeah, it's like cosplay is. I don't know. On Halloween, I'm not very, very exciting either. So it's just, I don't think it's for me. I have a ton of respect for people who do it, because like I said, I couldn't. So to be able to go out there and put yourself out there, and some people literally put themselves out there, like there's not very many inches of cloth on their body, and they're just walking around like they don't care. And that's amazing to me. Care what I look like and what people think of what I look like. And if they're staring at me, I get real uncomfortable.
I know I have one time seen a Namor cosplay that I pretty much had a Gabby from the X-Men Go Red moment. It was like, put some goddamn clothes on, son. Like this is a family show. Put some goddamn clothes on.
When I was in San Diego last month, there was a guy doing Silver Surfer, and all he had was a silver Speedo on. The rest of him was spray painted silver. He looked awesome. He was some kind of bodybuilder. It wasn't like jacked, but he was ripped, and he's just, you know, he looked like the Silver Surfer for sure. But I'm like, you got to be cold. I'm cold for you, and everybody sees. Everyone sees what you were born with, man. Like, come on.
Oh my God!
What's worse than that is he walked by a bunch. Like I don't know. We didn't have a great table location, but he just kept coming by like in a circle, and I think he wanted me to look at him. I don't know. I'm not going to assume, but maybe he did.
Yeah, with men, you can always tell when they're cold. But anyway, but sorry about that. But then
That's how we know what the show's about.
Yeah, it's that. See, that's what I'm saying. It takes some time, but the show does get derailed because I'll derail it.
Start asking the real.
No, but yeah, like it's just I think like anytime I go to a con, that's when I see all the cosplayer, then I get sad because I'm like, if superheroes were real, they would look really dumb, and this is the reason why they would look so dumb. Oh my God. Yeah, it's just a suspense of disbelief. Like, you know, I'm like, no, don't do this to me. Go away. But you know,
but more functional than others.
But you know, but Maddie is not like that. She's very cool. Maddie, we can't hear you.
Oh, this keeps happening.
Yeah, it keeps happening. We keep losing her audio. We can't hear you again. Yeah. Oh well. She will be back. Yeah, she will be back. So Kristen, do you have a question for Frank?
Yeah, I haven't heard from you. Come on, lay him on.
Well, I think it's a good time to get controversial. Yes. Isn't it always? You know, we've seen recently that social media can really make or break creators. So like, how have you drawn that line of like expressing your views and being yourself, but like, you know, not setting yourself up for like the anger and the trolls of the internet and things like that?
Sure. Well, there are a couple things to consider. One, I think I've got 500 Twitter followers, so it's not a very deep pool to get into trouble with. Sure. Facebook's sort of my bigger jam, but I don't know. Like I have a friend who's an artist, and she does a lot of variant covers. She did one for Valiant recently. She's done a couple image books. She does a lot for Action Lab, and she was one of the first creators I met in comics, and we became Facebook friends. And this was a few years ago, and I used to be a little politically active on Facebook, and I still have my opinions, and they're still just as strong. But she sat me down and she said, look, if you want to be successful and you want to be able to move up, you're going to have to tone that down or at least find a better way to do it. And I thought for a while about what she had said. And I said, I was like, nah, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to post all these opinions and change people's minds. But the truth is, like, yeah, you don't have a very loud voice on the internet, but it's forever unless you go back and delete everything. So I think my friend was right. So I sort of thought about the couple of things I really wanted to have be my brand. So, you know, comics, obviously, I post a lot about my dog. I mentioned a few times that I work out, so I talk a little bit about that. And I try to stick to those things, which tend to be less controversial. I don't get into trouble. I don't get a lot of people chiming in, telling me that I'm wrong. And I think it's a good way to go about it. Because, you know, it's unfortunate that we live in a world where the past can come back and bite you in the ass the way it does. Like, I feel very bad for James Gunn. Like, he did what he did, but it was a long time ago. He's obviously a better man now, and apologize for it. And I have some strong opinions about holding people accountable. I don't think we hold people accountable. I think we do us the second they do something wrong, and there's no room for growth or recover from that. And like, you know, we don't let people get better than they ever were, and that's a problem. But that is the world we live in, so I have to sort of roll with punches and keep my Facebook and Twitter and Instagram pretty neutral and on brand, I guess is the word for it.
Right. So, I mean, it seems like whatever you're writing now in 2028, you're going to get fired for it.
Yeah.
That seems like the trend now. And we're all four of us are part of a group, and then we see some people just write some stuff. And I almost wanted to kind of tell one guy the other day, I'm like, dude, no,
It's not looking good.
You know what that is? You know what that is? That's like people are angry and they don't feel seen and felt, and like that their opinions don't matter. So to get that negative attention, to be able to do something, to incite something in other people makes them feel valid in a way, and it's sad. Like I really feel bad for these people. I don't know if you guys saw the guy who started the stuff that got James Gunn sort of found out and fired. He'd gotten a little drunk and did like a live Facebook cast and bragged about how he got James Gunn fired, and that he could make up whatever he wanted about anyone, and there's no consequence for him and ultimate consequences for everyone else, and that's the world we live in. But I don't know. I try to be a hopeful person, and I think this technology is pretty new. We're still figuring out how to navigate it, and that what the rules are. And I think as time goes on, people having pasts that aren't reflective of who they are in the present will have less weight, and we'll be able to look at people for who they are now a little bit stronger. But right now, while we're still sort of learning the ins and outs of how to live in a social media world, it's going to be like this for a while. So we all have to just be careful.
Right.
Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, that's a very interesting point of view. And I share that as well. And I think we all kind of have the same discussion a couple of times as well, that what do you do about this? Because it seems like most of the time it comes back to diverse creators that are often actors, kind of often are the major victims. And then it kind of becomes a point of okay, so then they're leaving the social media. So who's winning in this? That whole idea of oh, I got someone off, that means I am the winner over here. But it just you're just losing a diverse voice more. It kind of gets to
which is a huge shame. A couple of years ago, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, when I was in Baltimore at Baltimore Comic-Con, a buddy of mine was rooming with a very famous creator who is of a diverse background. I don't want to say who, but he was rooming with her the same weekend that Comics and Diversity was going after her, and just hearing his secondhand account of rooming with her while that was happening, it just broke my heart. No one has ever harassed me, and I don't know that I'm ever gonna have to deal with that. I hope not. Maybe I will, but I'm not a regular target for that kind of stuff, and I struggle with how to make the world a little bit better. I don't know what my role is, how to inspire people not to be this way. But I just try to keep the faith that it's going to get better, and that these things will just go back to hell where they belong.
I think the fact that grief was so diverse in the stories and the characters, and I think sensitivity readers, that is a great idea. I think a lot of writers, especially in the big two, should be taking that into account. I love that you did that for the trans character story, and I love that no one's harassed you for anything in it, and I hope they never do. But I think you making the diverse stories is going to help, hopefully, push away all this hate at some point.
I sure hope so. I remember selling grief in a southern state. I won't say which one because I don't think very lowly of the state. I think I love the state, but it is in the South. And I remember selling grief to some people on a Saturday, and I saw that they had weekend passes for the convention, and wondering if they would come back to me the next day and say something after reading the book. And I think that was not a very good thing of me to do. That was probably my own biases about the South shining through, and maybe what I've seen, happen in southern states. But I'm very blessed that people reacted to the book as well as they have, and I don't know. I'm just super grateful that it hasn't come back to bite me in the butt, because I have really made it a point to talk about things that I thought we talked about more. And some of those things are not they're not comfortable for some people, and they react very poorly. And luckily, I've not had that happen. Yep, I'm sure it will happen. That's the odds are just that way right now in the world we live in. But I'll do my best to handle that situation with grace too.
But I do want to say though that if you're not getting that, that means you're not doing the job right.
No, there is a small part of me that says, where are my haters? Make me famous.
Exactly, because I mean, look at Marvel, like all the flack they got, but they got a lot of more fans out of it. I personally feel that.
Yeah.
So.
Listen, once a month I sit here and I debate whether I should send the PDF of Grief to the guy at Comics and Diversity just so he can make me famous. I always tell myself it's a bad idea. It'll do more harm than good, but it's I joke, but it really is like such a strange. I don't even call it a silver lining, but it is a path to fame and notoriety these days.
Yeah, true.
You're gonna shoot up to Amazon's top bestseller, by the way. That really literally what happened with Mockingbird.
Yeah. Book before that.
Yeah, wow. I had no idea what this book was about, and then I'm like, I'm gonna buy it, and this is amazing. So,
yeah, pretty much.
Kane wrote that thing.
Yeah,
it's just such a wonderful, wacky spy book. Like that was probably one of my favorite books. It was at 2016.
Right.
It's an excellent book. And it's just such a strong, like, I don't give a shit mentality towards feminism, like, which is sort of the stance I took in the trans girl story. Different, like, stop caring about what the other people say. Like, I think that's such a good attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Like, fuck them.
Yeah.
Fuck them. There you go. You heard it from Frank.
I'm quoting the story. It was literary. That was a literary.
Literally go, fuck him, Frank Gogol. That's a t-shirt. That's a t-shirt right there. We always look for t-shirt quotable things. Every episode we have one thing. So this episode is that. All
right. So we don't want to keep you too much longer.
Okay.
You're busy. You got a lot going on. So.
And we're going to bring you back for the Roy Harper episode.
Well, yeah, of course. Which I'm dying to. I am dying to spend a whole 2 hours talking about Roy Harper. But anyways.
Okay, but if you're going to do that, we have to have you back for a Buffy special too. Okay.
Yeah. I can be on that.
Perfect. Let's just go ahead and get that in the schedule. Okay.
Yeah, we will.
To kind of end this, I guess, last question, and we'll let you go. What can we expect from you next? Like, what do you, I mean, I know you can't tell us about a lot of stuff, but like, what do you have in the works right now? What are you working on?
I am not one of those people who's super precious about my work, and I will tell you about every book I have planned for the rest of my life.
All right, great.
But I have four things that I'm working on right now. They're at various stages. One of them we mentioned already is called The Used, and it is sort of my riff on a Buffy the Vampire Slayer type story. It's about a young woman named Kayla who is a recovering heroin addict who's just trying to get back in her mom's good graces and go home. And she ends up fighting basically vampire drug dealers. That's sort of like the cool angle of it. So it's like Buffy versus the Lost Boys.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
That's what people when I saw it at a convention. So that's going. The first issue is being drawn right now. It's been read by one of you already. I finished the second issue this morning, the script for that, and plotted out the third issue, which will be the last issue. This book's been picked up, so it will come out next year. And I will have more details on that when I'm allowed to talk about it. I have a second book, which might come out before it just because the artist is a little faster. It's called Dead End Kids, and it's sort of my take on a coming of age story. I always try to do like an elevator pitch, so this one's more like Stand By Me, the Stephen King story about the kids walking on the railroad tracks to find the dead body. Like that meets the heart. So it's three kids trying to solve their friend's murder, but it's like the anti John Hughes movie. Like the kids don't like come together and make each other better. They like their lives just get worse because of all of this, and it's pretty heart-wrenching stuff. But it's also like, I don't know, it's set in 1999, so it's got like a really cool 99 nostalgia factor that I'm really trying hard to make happen.
Yeah.
Like I see Power Rangers are back, Nickelodeon's back, so I'm just trying to get ahead of that curve. But that'll be out sometime next year as well. I'm really excited about that one. I have a third book called After the Storm, which is more in the vein of grief. It's a nonfiction, or well, it's semi-nonfiction. It's about a woman named Grace, and she's going through the motions of what it's like to live after a superstorm. So I mentioned earlier that Hurricane Sandy really affected me, and I've been thinking about the story for a long time. And then last year, when Hurricanes Maria and Harvey hit, I really thought something I wanted to get off my chest. So I wrote this story, and it's just, it picks up like the day after storm ends, and you follow Grace through damage and going back to the house. There's an emotional story to it that's unrelated to the storm. I don't want to ruin. This one's sort of an atypical comic, so this one probably so some they won't be published. But since it's probably going to be Kickstarter, I'm trying some different stuff with it. I'm interviewing some people who have been through each of those three majors. There's sort of a timeline of my experience going through the training. So it'll probably be a train-sized book, maybe about 100 pages. It's got really awesome art from Son Kinsey, who I've done a little bit of small stuff with in the past. It's done in watercolors. It's all hand-drawn with little different. I'm super excited about that. And then I just started writing a new miniseries today. This is another one I've been thinking about for a while. It's called Black Fractal, and it's essentially Silence of the Lambs in the making. An FBI officer, his son is kidnapped by a copycat killer. The killer who took her life happens to be an animal type character. I'm not selling it very well. I haven't been working on it that long, so I don't have to pitch down. But it's essentially Silence of the Lambs. So that'll be my 2019.
Awesome. I'm really excited.
Yeah. We're too. So where people can follow you so we can kind of keep all these awesome projects coming from you.
What? That was all static, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, you went out a little bit.
Oh, no, I was just saying that where can people follow you to kind of know about all these awesome projects?
I don't know. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm on everything at my name, just Frank Gogol, FrankGogol. I like Facebook and Instagram the most. I've mentioned a few times that I hate Twitter because Twitter's a cesspool, but it is necessary for comics. So anyone can follow me at my name. I like Facebook the best just because it's a two-way interaction, a little bit more so than everything else. I have a newsletter that I couldn't possibly tell you the link to get on it, but I share it from time to time on the other social media. So if you follow me there, you'll see it.
Awesome. So yeah, we will all follow you there and then hope for all this. Like, looking forward to every one of them. As I mentioned, I've always been winking at people that I already read the first issue of the Used, and I'm not wait to read that in whole. Like, so you're saying that that's going to be 3 issues?
Yep.
Okay. I cannot wait for that because, like, I love vampire being killed and hunted. If you can make one of them sparkly and then kind of have that metaphor going, that would be perfect.
She says this, but one of her notes when she gave me back the script was to take out the Twilight joke I put in there.
Oh my god.
She didn't age well.
I mean, I'm just saying, do not say it, but show it. Picture can say 1,000 words. I'm just kidding.
There is a little nod to making vampires sparkly in one of the action scenes.
Right.
It wasn't intended, but it's there.
Right.
So yeah, I'm excited. That book is a monster, which is a bad metaphor. But it's really, really emotional. Like it's heart-wrenching. Like I every single issue. Like when I got to the last page, I'm like, damn, I messed her up. So.
Well, we're all excited to read that. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope we had a ton of fun, and I hope you did too. And
definitely did. Thank you for having me. Like,
yeah,
this was way more fun than whatever I was going to do other than this. Like, probably nothing.
Good, that's what we like to hear.
That's exactly
So
what
maybe you'll join us again, which would be great.
I hope so. Well, we're going to do Roy Harper, so.
Right. We're gonna do a Roy Harper special episode, and that we can coincide that as with the release of the next great things from you, and then then after that we're gonna have a Buffy episode.
Yeah,
perfect.
You better get like 12 hours for that.
Right. Well, no, I mean when the used coming along, that's when we can do Buffy, and it will be perfect theme. Like
there we go.
Right.
That is good. That is good. Well, April, I think, is the first issue. I gotta make sure, but that should be the first issue.
Perfect. So I have from now until April to watch all Buffy and then all the comics and everything.
Yeah.
Just, do yourself a favor and skip most of season 4.
Yep.
Oh, good.
All of Riley.
Most of it.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I have like a lot of experts to help me out with Buffy. All right. Thank you, Frank. And we will keep in touch and we'll keep following your career. And I know that for a fact that it's gonna be a great one. And of course, I'm meeting you on Baltimore Comic Con. So
yeah, in a couple weeks.
Yeah. Anyway, yes, it is. I just had to figure out. Yeah, it is. All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
That was amazing.
That was great. Are we signing off now too? Or are we gonna?
I think this is a good time. Though.
I think that's good. I think I'm still magically awake after MatsuriCon.
Right.
Yeah, I think this is probably a good time. I mean, thanks for everybody for tuning in.
Right.
This is really great. I hope we have him on again. This is really fun.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Next week, everyone, we will be talking about Heathen, which is our hit from In Stock Trades. Yes. So next week, their schedule is a little bit different, so everybody knows we will be on Saturday at 8 p.m. instead of our usual Sunday. So I hope you all please at least tune in, or if you can't, maybe the next day. You're gonna watch it then.
That's cool. And it's Monday is Labor Day, so just watch it then.
Yeah.
Or just tune in. But so Maddie, Kristen, where can people buy books? If I want to buy
In Stock Trades.
InStockTrades.com.
Where you can buy books anywhere else? Are you crazy?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Are you getting 50% off? If you're not, what are you doing with your life? Go to InStockTrades.com.
Right, and what kind of what is there free shipping available for that?
If you buy over $50 worth of books, sorry,
it's okay. You will get free shipping. We'll finish each other's sentences.
Poorly, but we'll try.
Ladies, we practiced this. What's happening right now?
We've never practiced anything in our lives.
But anyway, go get to comics from instructrade.com and to tune in next Saturday where we can talk about all things heathens. So and probably fan fiction. I don't know. We're thinking about it. So so if you want to see us embarrass ourselves, so join in.
Make a dramatic fan fiction reading episode. I'm in.
Yeah. Who?
Let's think about it.
Can you imagine who my characters are gonna be about?
Yes.
You will never guess. So tune in next week.
17th. That's all I know.
And Saturday at 8 p.m. to find out.
If one of the people is not Namor, I'll be upset.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.